Ticket ID. This is a military museum, not a shelter, the guard snapped. He didn't flinch, just said softly, I'm not here for trouble. Just wanted to see what I once belonged to. Then a man in uniform froze, eyes fixed on the man's insignia. That man, he saved my life. Marja, Afghanistan, in 2002. Franklin Miles was 68, though he looked older. His back was slightly hunched, one leg dragging just enough to show a wound long faded but never healed. His coat, an old military issue, hung loose over his thin frame. He didn't beg. He didn't speak unless spoken to. Most mornings, he sat quietly at the corner of 9th and Franklin Avenue, organizing empty plastic bottles in a shopping cart and sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped thermos. Those who passed rarely noticed him. But to anyone paying attention, there was a strange dignity in the way he folded his blanket each morning, precise, like a soldier still following orders. That afternoon, Franklin made his way to the National Military History Museum, a place he'd only seen from across the street. Today, something pulled him closer. He waited patiently in line, hands deep in his pockets, until the security guard stopped him cold. "Ticket?" the guard asked, glancing at Franklin's worn boots. Franklin hesitated. "I don't have one." "ID," the guard cut in, already frowning. Franklin shook his head. The guard's voice dropped colder. "This isn't a shelter. You can't just walk in." People behind began to murmur. Franklin stepped back. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just wanted to see what I used to belong to." A group of school children passed by, giggling at the strange old man in a frayed army coat. One little girl tugged her mother's hand and lingered. Without a word, she slipped Franklin a folded piece of paper, a drawing of a soldier cradling a child. Franklin took it gently. For a moment, his eyes didn't blink. He gave a small nod and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart." Then he folded the picture with quiet care, as if it were something fragile, something sacred. Just as Franklin turned to leave, a man in full military uniform paused at the museum gates. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Royce, tall and sharp in posture, glanced casually toward the commotion, then froze. His eyes locked onto the faded silver insignia on Franklin's coat. It was nearly invisible, stitched above the heart, worn by time and sun. He stepped forward, voice low, uncertain. "Sir, is your name Franklin Miles?" Franklin didn't answer, just met his gaze. Steady. Royce's brow furrowed. "You wore that patch in Kandahar. My father used to talk about you." Security had already called local police. They approached Franklin with cautious authority, asking him to leave the premises. "I'm not causing trouble," he said calmly. "Just standing." He didn't resist when they placed him in handcuffs. His steps were slow but firm, each one echoing louder than the last in the wide marble hall. As the cruiser pulled away, Royce watched from the museum steps, conflicted. "He's not some vagrant," he muttered. "Why the hell is no one seeing that at the precinct?" Officer David Kim processed Franklin's information. "Did you ever serve, sir?" he asked out of courtesy. Franklin replied without looking up. "I once carried your lieutenant out with half a leg left." Kim paused, confused. Later that evening, while scrolling through an old family photo, his mother's living room wall caught his eye a framed newspaper clipping of a soldier cradling a child in Afghanistan. The face, though aged now, was unmistakable. "Mom," he whispered, "who is this man?" Public defender Clara Hughes was assigned to Franklin's case. Young but sharp, she requested his records through the VA database. Nothing came up. No discharge papers. No benefits. No record of service. She requested Social Security data. Nothing. "This can't be right," she muttered. Then she tried something different, cross-referencing a classified operations archive she once interned with. There, she found a phrase flagged in sealed Raven Echo. She didn't yet know what it meant, but the fact that it was redacted chilled her more than any answer. "Across town, A local news intern named Jenna Cruz was digging through old archives for a Memorial Day segment. She paused at a grainy black and white photo on the front page of the New York Times, dated 2003. A soldier carrying a bleeding child through smoke and rubble. No name, no credit, just the headline, The Unknown Protector. But it wasn't unknown anymore. She zoomed in. Same eyes, same silver patch. Is this the man they just arrested, she whispered. Back at the courthouse for a bail hearing, Clara Hughes was struggling to convince the judge that Franklin was more than just a name without records. Then the courtroom doors creaked open. A man in military uniform entered. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Royce. He stood, his voice steady but low. If Franklin Miles is on trial for standing outside a museum built from sacrifice, then I request the court know the truth. He paused. He pulled me out of a crater in Marja. Saved 17 lives. Refused a medal. Disappeared. Gasps spread. Franklin, in cuffs, didn't react. Royce turned to the judge. You may not find his name in your system, but there's a wall in Kandahar where his name never faded. Silence. But no one was looking at Franklin the same anymore. The next morning, an encrypted military file was leaked to the press, no one knew by whom. It was a grainy, night vision video from Kandahar, 2004. A small special operations team under fire. Civilians trapped inside a bombed-out school. One man, face partly hidden, was giving rapid hand signals, shielding children with his own body, guiding them out one by one. A voice from behind the camera whispered, "That's Captain Miles. He's insane. He's going back for the last two." Then the voice of a general, in a briefing from years later, cut in. Franklin Miles redefined what it meant to lead. He taught me that leaving anyone behind was never an option. Suddenly, the whole country had a face to that name, and it wasn't just a name anymore. That afternoon, during the official court hearing, a man in full-dress uniform entered the room. It was General Joseph Langdon, commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command. The entire room stood in silence. He walked to the stand, placed a sealed file in front of the judge. I am here to confirm that Mr. Franklin Miles was the commanding officer of Raven Echo, a black operations unit disbanded in 2007. He led over 30 classified missions. None of them failed. Clara blinked. The judge looked stunned. Langdon continued, most of his actions remain sealed, but I can tell you this, there are families alive in this country and abroad because of him. What he endured after was not his failure. It was ours. Clara stood up, her voice steady, but her hands trembled. If General Langdon knew this, why was Franklin Miles erased? The courtroom held its breath. Langdon looked down, then faced the judge. Because in 2006, Captain Miles refused an order. He was told to neutralize a suspected enemy compound. No confirmation, just assumption. He saw it was a civilian shelter. He pulled his men out and saved 23 lives. He paused. The higher-ups wanted silence, not truth. He was quietly discharged. His records purged. A murmur spread across the room. Reporters scribbled frantically. Langdon's voice dropped lower, and I signed off on that order. Back then, I told myself it was protocol, but it was cowardice. He stood by honor. We buried it. That same night, the story exploded across media platforms. A list of other veterans began surfacing, names redacted, careers erased, all tied to moral refusals or whistleblowing. Congress launched an inquiry. The term ghost vets trended worldwide. But in the middle of the storm, Franklin stayed silent. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He had simply wanted to remember. And somehow, in remembering, he helped the world reckon with what it had chosen to forget. The judge didn't hesitate. Mr. Franklin Miles is not guilty, and more than that, he is a man of honor. That afternoon, the Department of Defense held an emergency press briefing. Standing before the cameras, General Langdon bowed his head. We failed him. Franklin Miles was a hero, and we let him be forgotten. Franklin's military file was restored. So were his medals, pension, and full medical care. No applause, no banners. Franklin just nodded slightly, eyes fixed on the museum he once stood outside, denied by the very history he helped write. The next day, the military museum reopened. Thomas Grady, the same guard who had turned him away, stood quietly at the entrance. When Franklin approached, this time with an official invitation in hand, Grady stepped forward and removed his cap. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Franklin looked at him not with anger, but with calm. Now you do. Just then, the little girl from that day appeared with her mother. You can go in now. Right. Franklin nodded gently. This time, he said, as someone who belongs here. After the ceremony, an older man pushed through the crowd, walking with a cane. Franklin turned, eyes widening. Marshall. They had served together, each thinking the other lost in a blast years ago. Marshall grasped Franklin's shoulder. I made it out. Barely. But I lost everything until I saw your face on the news. They said nothing more. The two sat together outside the museum, the sun warm on their backs. They had once shared a foxhole in silence. Now, they shared something else. A return to the world they'd once been erased from. Within hours, Franklin's story swept across the country. The image of him standing inside the museum facing a framed photograph of his younger self cradling a child in Afghanistan went viral. News anchors called him the Forgotten Sentinel. Veterans posted online, sharing similar stories of being erased, misfiled, discarded. Hashtags surged, we remember Franklin. No soldier forgotten. His silence had once kept him hidden. Now it spoke louder than any speech. Across America, conversations began not just about him, but about all those who'd served, then vanished from the system's memory. Franklin was invited to Capitol Hill. Legislators bowed their heads as he entered, not out of obligation, but respect. The Veterans Integrity Review Act was passed within weeks. Thousands of records began being reevaluated. One military school renamed its ethics hall the Miles Honor Wing. At the dedication, a student asked him, "Sir, how did you stay silent for so long?" He replied, "Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right ears." And now the country was listening. One quiet morning, Franklin returned to the museum not with guards nor fanfare, just his cane and cap. He walked slowly down the Hall of Valor until he stood before a bronze plaque. It bore just two words, Franklin Miles. A young boy approached, wide-eyed. "Are you a real hero?" Sir Franklin bent slightly so their eyes met. "A hero," he said, "is just someone who didn't walk away when it would have been easier." The boy smiled, nodded, and saluted. And as Franklin walked on, sunlight followed him through the glass. A man once forgotten, now never again.